Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of the least interesting Legendary Lord campaigns to play in Total War Warhammer 3 Patch 4.0 Immortal Empires. Now, these are Legendary Lords that do have a good deal of strength, either because their race is strong or because they are strong, or both, but there are certain things, certain mechanics in their campaigns that just don't work with either their playstyle or their racial playstyle, or both. Yes, the mechanics may not work well in a campaign for what they're trying to do, or those mechanics just don't mesh very well with the race. And at number 5, we start to Rakarth. It was either going to be a Rakarth or Teclis. Some people could have even considered Emmerich, but here's the thing about Emmerich. While he certainly has a High Elven campaign that's very different than all the other High Elven campaigns, it is a campaign that does work. It is a slower campaign, but there's a lot of interesting things in Emmerich's campaign. And the racial mechanics that Emmerich has, as well as his own Legendary Lord power and the nobles he gets, do actually help him out a great deal. Besides, the Dark Lands are one of the most interesting areas to deal with in a campaign at the moment in the game. Like, Emmerich has had issues since Warhammer 2. His campaign was pure misery in Warhammer 2. It isn't pure misery. In fact, it can be a lot of fun in Warhammer 3. What about Teclis? Teclis certainly has his own issues. He's very far away from the main High Elven action, but he does want to get in on it. Well, Teclis doesn't have a great campaign either. The thing is, the High Elves are the kind of race where you can certainly play a long-term campaign, and that will work very well, because that's how the High Elves play as a race. They're the kind of race that builds strength as you play through their campaign, be it hero capacity, lords, the influence system, economy, etc., etc. The Dark Elves, of which Rakarth is part of, are exactly the opposite. The Dark Elves are an extremely aggressive naval expansionist race, which is the problem for Rakarth, because he is not playing a really aggressive naval expansionist campaign. You could say that it's certainly different playing Rakarth, playing a slower paced campaign as the Dark Elves, and it can work. But compared to all the other Legendary Lords of the Dark Elves, including Hellebron, which a lot of people dislike for whatever reason, but even though Hellebron has her own fair share of issues, Hellebron does work well within the context of how the Dark Elves operate. Rakarth doesn't work well within the context of how the Dark Elves operate. It's a combination of starting position, situation that he has to deal with in his campaign, campaign objectives, and faction mechanics. So let's take a look at the situation. Faction mechanic-wise, he gets a minus 10% upkeep for all monstrous units. And whenever he captures this element, he does have a chance of capturing a variety of monsters. It depends on the race that you're dealing. So he starts at war with the Lizardmen, so one of the things he can capture are feral carnosaurs, just the dinosaurs in general, right? So you can capture dinosaurs raiding jungle regions, attacking lizardmen settlements. Like, for instance, over here I have a carnosaur and a stegodon at turn 12. This might sound very interesting, and indeed it could be. The problem is these units cost a significant amount, and it's just not worth it. Not only minus 10% upkeep that you get for these monsters, faction-wide, because while the power of these units certainly is there, Warhammer 3 is all about scalability. It's about having as many armies and strong ones as possible as quickly as possible. Now, the Dark Elves are that kind of race that can maintain a lot of armies very quickly. The Black Arcs themselves do help them out in a significant fashion here, because you can maintain entire stacks very cheaply, you can recruit really good units very quickly from tier 1 Black Arc with Black Arc Corsairs. It is a playstyle that works. That's one of the things that makes Lokir's campaign, who also starts very far away from the main Dark Elven action in Naggaroth and going into Ulfon, it's one of the main things that makes Lokir's campaign work as opposed to Rakarth. Whereas Rakarth's campaign, because of the cost of these units, is just going to be slower. Now you might say, oh, just don't recruit them, right? So you're kind of nullifying the whole point. Like, to properly play Rakarth, you're going to limit how many monsters you're going to recruit, and you're just going to do what everyone else is doing, which is recruit Dark Shards, Dread Spears, and Black Arc Corsairs. So what's the point of the campaign? That's one of the first issues to talk about. And if we look at his Lord situation, he doesn't, if he had like a minus 50% upkeep for monsters in his armies, it would end up working significantly better, but he doesn't have that. He has a recruitment duration benefit for monstrous units, melee defense, and 2 abilities, Whiplash and Beast Lord Gaze. He does make a monster army work well in terms of its power, but he doesn't really have the upkeep benefit in order to make that work properly. And he could also really stand to use campaign movement range benefit, which again, he doesn't have. He does have a casualties captured post-battle benefit from his special skill line, sure, and he does increase the chance monsters will be added to monster pens, absolutely, but a lot of the benefits that he does have in his campaign just don't mesh well with the way that the Dark Elves want to play, especially in the important parts of a campaign, which is the early game. Like, the most interesting parts of a campaign in Warhammer 3 are in the early game. The most important parts of a campaign in Warhammer 3, for the Dark Elves in particular, are in the early game. Rakarth's early game is slow. The reason it's slow is, one, you only start with the tier 1 settlement. Yes, it does have a barracks and a port, but it is going to be incredibly limited. And you're going to spend a lot of turns just capturing your initial province. That means it takes a long time to get the slaves that fuel the Dark Elves economy, that fuel the Dark Elves in general. It's going to take a lot of time to get the slaves for the Sacrifice of Mathlan and the Sacrifice of Cain, which are two things you want to get as quickly as possible. So you end up in a situation where you have a race that wants to be very, very aggressive on the campaign map, but is being played by a lore that is just very slow in terms of progression. Because you start with a tier 1 settlement, you can't instantly start constructing it into a tier 2. Like, look at Malekith's situation. Malekith may have a limited campaign start, he absolutely does, but he can at least start turning Nagorond into a tier 2 settlement from turn 1. You actually need to get the real growth for that. And on top of that, the jungle is just slow to navigate. Now, you could argue that you don't have to worry about the jungle in Rakarth's campaign, because the only thing you need to achieve in your terms of your short campaign victory conditions, the only things that you care about when you're looking at the short campaign victory conditions that are in Lustra, is to maintain control over the Turtle Isles. After that, you could just leave over here and go north. There is a sea lane even. The problem with that is that the sea lane is, well, here. You want to go to Nagoroth, you're going to need to get that sea lane. You're going to need to spend a lot of time traveling from here to here if you want to do that. And that's something you want to do eventually, because you are required to deal with the main High Elven factions. By the way, an annoying thing about the Dark Elven objectives in general is that you have to wipe out Emmerich and Teclis, who are very, very far away from Ulfon, so that's a lovely affair. Well, I guess I was required if you could just take the point of Lestria, end up in a war with Oxyatl, and then go for the Southern Castaway. So, joy, that would be a fun experience, wouldn't it? A very slow experience, I might add. I would argue that the best thing you could do is maybe wipe out the Tomb Kings over here if you don't encounter Tenuin, as I did here. Wipe out the Tomb Kings and take the sea lane to Cathay, teach Lokir a couple of manners maybe, and then take the sea lane here to then take the sea lane. It is a really bad system. That's just with Rakarth's army. But what about Karen Carr? Well, if you're incredibly lucky, by the time you get the event to Confederate Karen Carr, you might end up in a situation like this where Leafanar hasn't wiped them all out completely. Though at this point he was very, very, very close to doing so, and this army just had a bunch of Dread Spears in it. I dismissed the Dread Spears, started recruiting Shades as it should be, and got the Black Hardcore over here, but this is going to be a problem. By the way, fun fact about that Confederation, you get all the penalties of Confederation for doing so, so it's quite possible that when you do end up confederating Karakard, Malekith and Hellebron might just shortly thereafter declare war on you. Great. That is an awesome campaign experience as the Dark Elves. Say what you will about Lokir in his campaign, he does have a bit of a similar issue. But in Lokir's campaign, while the problem is similar in terms of the long campaign objectives, the issues that Lokir is going to have to face, because he also wants to deal with the High Elves, and he also wants Karen Carr. One, he can get Karen Carr much earlier than Rakarth can do so, because he can fight battles much earlier, he can traverse territory much faster. He's been very slow over here in this campaign for whatever reason. But you can take a lot more territory, and Cathay is a significantly better area for him to deal with. Like, for a naval aggressive faction, the fact that you have rivers in Cathay that you can use to traverse with your Black Arcs is a pretty significant benefit. And Lokir's campaign is a lot of fun. It has been fun since day one that Immortal Empires came out. Rakarth's campaign is just slow, and his faction effects just don't mesh well with how you really want to build your armies as the Dark Elves. I understand that they were trying to make a unique campaign, and I understand that from a lore perspective, the Dark Elves should have a campaign that is focused on the monsters. I kind of liked his Albion start more, honestly, in Warhammer 2. Having a legendary lord of the Dark Elves in Lustria makes sense if you give him the mechanics to succeed in Lustria, like campaign movement range, all that kind of stuff, which he doesn't have. Also an upkeep benefit. Like, Moravi Geflau gets a minus 30% upkeep benefit for her entire army. Rakarth gets a minus 10% benefit for his faction, but it's not enough. These units are just way, way too expensive. And these are not even the most expensive units. You can consider the Black Dragons, for instance, as being incredibly expensive units. Also, I might want to add that a lot of these monster units, some of them are really good. Yes, some of them are really, really solid. Others, not necessarily quite as much. Like Harpies, yeah, screw them. Saber Tusks, no thank you. Giant Wolves, Feral Bears, no. Feral Ice Bears, maybe, to a limited extent. Explosive Squigs, yeah, a bit of fun there, but not really. So, the units themselves, a lot of them, like the Black Dragons, Carnosaurs, and Stegodons, absolutely. The Hydras, absolutely, but others not necessarily quite as much. It's just a campaign that just doesn't mesh well with either how the game is played in the best possible way or how the Dark Elves are played. And the campaign objectives just don't work well with this kind of starting position. If he had campaign objectives where he was trying to take control over all of Lustria, that would be different. But then you'd be fighting a purely land-based campaign as the Dark Elves, which is not a great experience either. Like when you're focused so heavily on land as you would in the middle of damn Lustria. And number 4 is Vilitch of the Warriors of Chaos. Tzeentch. What discussion could there be about Tzeentch? Imagine playing a campaign where the Tzeentchian casualty replenishment issue rears its head. Say what you will about the Changeling, at least he doesn't have that particular problem. And yes, it is certainly an issue, especially when you have a race like the Warriors of Chaos where you know you're going to win every battle, and yet you have to fight a lot of those battles manually. But beyond that particular problem, let's talk about Vilitch. He has a fairly slow campaign, starting in the Red Fortress, and either having to go for Cafe, trying to get past the Great Bastion with an early game army, or the smarter decision, which is to go after Grimgor and vassalize the Green Bastard, and make him conquer Cafe for you. I think out of those two choices, vassalizing Grimgor is the more interesting one. But that basically means you're playing Kolik's campaign with a worse legendary lord, because that's exactly what Kolik wants to do. Kolik wants to go for Cafe. Kolik wants to vassalize Grimgor and then vassalize the factions in Cafe. There's not necessarily a whole lot of difference between the two campaigns in terms of objectives. The thing is, Kolik is just a much, much better lord, because he's undivided, so he has all of the gifts accounts from the undivided lords. So he actually can get good casualty replenishment, unlike Vilitch, as an example. And while he can't forcefully confederate the other legendary lords of the Warriors of Chaos, unlike Archaon and Belegar, he is an absolute juggernaut of death and destruction on the campaign map. Kolik has potential in a way that Vilitch doesn't. And to understand the difference in potential, Kolik starts with a Hell Cannon as his first gift. Vilitch starts with a unit of blue horrors as his first gift, which I've actually gotten rid of because who wants to keep horrors as part of their army? It's one of those weird situations where, like with the Champions of Chaos, you get much weaker units than what the undivided Legendary Lords of Chaos get. It's probably something to do with Realms of Chaos. Then we have to look at the faction effects. You do get the teleport stance, which is certainly a significant benefit in its own right and something not to be dismissed. You do convert a portion of your own casualties into souls. So souls won't necessarily be an issue in Vilitch's campaign, which is certainly a benefit compared to Kolic. But that's kind of where the benefits really do stop. I mean, you do get benefits for having high winds of magic, absolutely. So that is nice to have, and your vassals get barrier and spread siege and corruption, which makes them substantially deadlier to deal with when you're thinking about the barrier situation. The barrier is a two-way street. The changing of ways, it's not exactly great benefit in a lot of ways in a campaign. Like, yeah, spraying corruption can be useful, but corruption is not going to be a problem. I'd say the only thing that's actually useful out of the changing of ways is just like Spawnify, where you just give one of your vassals or an army free chaos spawn. So it's like, if I give Kolic free chaos spawn over here, that would be useful. And assuming I'm not eliminating the Hell Cannon in the process, that would be pretty crap. Now, Vilitch is certainly a powerful lord. He's good in battles. He's absolutely a monster in battles in a substantial number of ways. He's good in both melee, and when we're thinking about using magic, he's going to do quite well with respect to that. In fact, you might not be able to get him killed in a battle because of his ability. That's because he gets this item, the Vessel of Chaos, which replenishes barrier hit points of combatants when casting a spell. And since Vilitch can certainly cast a good amount of spells, you get the idea. So Vilitch is maybe nigh on unkillable during the course of a battle. Though it does take a while to get there. You do need rank 15 to get that particular item, but the power is certainly there. It's just a worse campaign than Kolic, though. Like, Kolic has more flexibility. The biggest problem, though, for Vilitch are not his faction effects or his starting position or anything like that. It's just like Siege is just not that great. Like, Nurgle can work, Horn can work, Slaanesh can work. Siege is the least interesting of the Monogod factions. In a lot of ways. Like, Azazel at least gets the diplomatic benefit that Slaanesh has. Valkia gets campaign movement range, of course. That's pretty substantial. And Festus gets all the plagues of Nurgle with the far easier access to them than poor Kugaf does. So there's benefits. You get the cheap-ass changing of ways mechanic and teleport. Teleport is good, but here's the problem. The gifts of chaos of Siege are crap in a huge number of ways. Like, you consider the Ties of Magic. You do get the minus 25% cooldown to all spells and barrier, which is all very well and good. But the problem is you're suffering that miscast base chance of plus 25%. So if you want to use really powerful spells in a campaign, good luck with that as Siege. Then you have the most insulting gift of chaos, which is like Forbidden Knowledge. 10 control for 35% research rate. Even if you're using a mod to remove the difficulty penalty, sacrificing 10 control in a province where a measly 35% research rate, as the Warriors of Chaos, remember, is absolutely not worth it. The units can be obviously good, but the gifts themselves do leave a lot to be desired. Like, if you're playing with Siege, or if you're getting the gifts of chaos of Siege, like, the gifts of chaos of Siege are actually the least worth it out of all of them. There are obviously some benefits over here, like Arcane Wisdom and Arrows of Destiny, without a doubt. The experience benefit and the Gaze of Fate. Sure, the ammunition for armies led by Siege devoted characters is worthless. The unit experience and warframe attacks are certainly good. Like, the only real benefit that's actually good out of here is Arcane Wisdom. Experience, sure, it's always solid, but these are some of the least consequential benefits you can have. And yes, you can get Lords of Change, yes, you can get Soul Grinders, and yes, you can get Cockatrices, though I would probably not go for Cockatrices over here when we're thinking about it. But it's just the Gifts of Chaos of Siege are the least powerful, the least interesting out of all the Gifts of Chaos. Slaanesh is not necessarily in that much of a better position, but Slaanesh doesn't just give you a 35% research rate benefit for 10 control in all your provinces. That is insulting Because tank control can be a fair amount that can nuke you down. Like, for instance, over here, yes, I have the mod installed that reduces it, but if I lost tank control, well, I'd be heading towards Rebellion. And even if I'm not heading towards Rebellion, I'm sacrificing in terms of recruitment costs, I'm sacrificing in terms of growth for research rate. That is pathetic. There's no reason to play Vilitch when you have Skolik, who's right next to him, who has the same campaign objectives, who you want to play the campaign in the same way. There's almost no reason to do so, to play Vilitch, with the exception of just trying to, of just taking advantage of that teleporter stance on the campaign map. Which absolutely can be good. Don't get me wrong on that. Can absolutely be good to use, but that's about the only tangible benefit I would argue that Vilitch has. And look, if you're playing Kolic, you can just get the Recruit Defeat the Legendary Lords mod and just get Vilitch as part of your faction. Like, I hate to bring up mods, but they are important in this discussion. Like, oh, if you just want to enjoy the uniqueness of Vilitch's campaign, you can just play Archaon or Belegar if you want to just get access to Vilitch to make a Tzeentchian army for him. That could work. Or you could just play Kolic with a mod to allow you to get the Recruit to Defeat the Legendary Lords mod, and that would also work quite well. Like, Vilitch is the kind of Legendary Lord he's good to confederate or good to get access to, but he doesn't have a great campaign to actually play. And number 3 is Belegar Ironhammer. I know people voted him as number 2 on the poll, but I personally think that he isn't quite as bad in this respect as the 2 factions that are going to earn the first 2 positions. But Belegar is the kind of campaign that was designed for Warhammer 1. It kind of worked in Warhammer 1, though it did have its own issues. But here's how the campaign is designed. You get these 4 Clan Angorand Ancestor heroes, which was an enormous benefit in Warhammer 1, starting with 4 heroes from the very beginning of your campaign. But the downside is you have a plus 50% upkeep until you take Carragate Peak. So you're basically stuck with 1, maybe 2 armies if you can afford them until you get Carragate Peaks. This kind of worked in Warhammer 1, partly because you had a much safer starting position, partly because of how that game worked as opposed to Warhammer 3 and even Warhammer 2. But it doesn't really work all that well in Warhammer 3 because you've got a lot more threats. Like, you've got Ikeclaw, you've got Aranessa, you've got Scrag close enough to you that are genuine threats in your campaign. Well, not really threats. Belegar can defeat any single one of them easily in a 1v1 battle, but all 3 of them, considering everything, and I mean, you also got Mogr over there in Estalia. And for all your pain and suffering that you're going to endure because of that 50% upkeep, plus 50% upkeep until you take Carragate Peaks, all you get when you get to Carragate Peaks as a unique structure is not the Grand Underway Junction, which is a significant benefit. No, you get the Reinforced Citadel, which is a useless benefit. I mean, the control benefit is not something to sneeze at, but the garrison and defense benefit is just pointless. So you've got a really harsh campaign that just doesn't work very well in Warhammer 3. Then, when we're looking at his faction effects, you get 10 leadership when laying siege or encircling. Let me tell you this about dwarf siege tactics. You get a bunch of artillery and quarrelers and you kill everything from range. And if you have to go in there, well, Belegar's good enough on his own. So a leadership benefit for siege is not really all that much. Vanguard deployment during underway battles, the only context that would be useful in any way, shape, or form is if you have an army coming from your rear and you might want to deploy closer to the army in front of you to take that out before turning your army around. That is the only context in which Vanguard deployment in underway battles, which are a straight tunnel, is worth it in any way, shape, or form. Now, that's not to say Belegar isn't a useful legendary lord. He actually has some really, really good lord effects over here, like Rally the Holds, Gather the Old Clans, Oath of Reclamation, to an extent. The leadership one in foreign territory is decent enough. Plus free leadership for his entire army. Then he can get a significant amount of benefits for Rangers, if you're using them in his campaign, and he does get hero recruitment Fane in all provinces in hero capacity. So his special skill line is actually useful, but it's not worth using Belegar to play his campaign, it's far better if you're playing a campaign as Forgrim and then confederate Belegar, because again, Belegar is really powerful, sure, if you confederate them, because you would still gain the heroes, you would still gain them as a lord, you would not have that 50% upkeep downside and the annoying starting position. It's not like Forgrim's campaign is a cakewalk, but Forgrim just has much better faction effects in his campaign. Also, something worth noting about Forgrim versus Belegar. Belegar, out of all the dwarf factions, has the highest survivability of all of them. Well, he and Ungrim. Forgrim and Grombrindle generally tend to get wiped out. Forik generally does survive, but he doesn't achieve quite as much as Belegar does. Like, Belegar may end up the master of this entire portion of the campaign map, and even if he does, he's generally not going to lose to all of his opponents when under control of the AI on legendary difficulty. With Forgrim, it's a coin toss. So if you're playing a Belegar campaign, one of the things you're going to have to do, and it's a similar situation to Ungrim, one of the things you're going to have to do is wipe out Skarsnik quickly enough so that Forgrim doesn't get wiped out. So it's like, it's a complicated campaign situation. It's a limited campaign in a game where limited campaigns are not really great to play. That is the difference between Warhammer 3 and Warhammer 1 and 2. Warhammer 3 is all about having a lot of armies, maintaining them. Dwarves have an issue with that by default. For Belegar, that is far worse because of the upkeep situation that he does have to deal with. And that is something that does severely limit his campaign potential. Again, he is strong. Absolutely very strong. Starting four heroes is not something to sneeze at. Like 2 Thanes, 1 Engineer, 1 Rune Lord, 1 Runesmith. That's not something to sneeze at. In fact, it is quite very powerful, but it just doesn't work all that well within the context of Warhammer 3 as a campaign. Powerful Lord, not a great campaign. Then at number 2, we have Skarsnik, who in quite a few ways I would struggle to even call a legendary lord at this point. Skarsnik, in fact, is so worthless that you don't even want to use him in an army when you confederate him. Well, you kind of do, but there's also reasons why you wouldn't want to use him. I'll get into those in just a second. But let's look at Skarsnik. You can only recruit orc units from Carrick 8 Peaks. So in order to have any kind of orc units in your faction, you can only recruit them from the settlement here. And Carrick 8 Peaks is not going to be a great settlement for recruitment, because Greenskins, the way they recruit a lot of units quickly is they gain a lot of settlements in a particular province. Carrick 8 Peaks was a substantially better province in Warhammer in previous games than it is in Warhammer 3. Like, it's only 2 regions. That does severely limit how useful it is for both Skaven. So Quake does want it, Skarsnik does want it. Hell, even the dwarves having only 2 regions does limit the benefit of having Carrick 8 Peaks. It's still a great settlement, but the province itself actually does suck. You do get the minus 40% upkeep and recruitment cost benefit for goblin units. Now, this is fairly substantial, undeniably so, but it's not like goblin units are that expensive as units, ultimately. And while you certainly can drown your early game enemies and goblins, you're going to encounter issues in the mid-late game without being able to recruit orcs, in particular big uns, and in particular black orcs later on. He does have that WoP benefit of Doomdavers. I would say Grimgore's WoP benefit of Black Horse is substantially better. The only faction effect that's really, really great beyond the upkeep is the character experience of 100% for all heroes, because Greenskins can get a lot of heroes. But the hero action cost is not necessarily that important or important at all. Very rarely will you use hero actions in a campaign in Warhammer 3. Heroes are better suited to be in armies where they provide various benefits in combat and outside of combat. So for instance, even Goblin Big Boss, it's better to have him in the army because you get more post-battle loot with the scavenge ability that he does have. So that is one of the issues. Another issue to mention with regards to Skarsnik is that because he can't recruit orc units, his garrisons also don't contain orc units. They contain night goblins. While night goblins aren't completely terrible, suffice to say the orc units would present a far greater challenge for anyone that attacks your settlements. As you might imagine, that does become a problem. It would have been extremely irritating had they limited his hero recruitment ability regards to like orc heroes, because you wouldn't have black orc big bosses or orc shamans, but you do at least have those available in a campaign. But there are quite a few issues that do get created with that. Then we have Skarsnik's skill line. He gets Lightning Strike. Now, Lightning Strike was very useful to have in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. It isn't so useful to have in Warhammer 3 because of the changes to Lightning Strike. Then you get the charge bonus for Night Goblins and Squig Hoppers, and you also get Skarsnik's Wah ability, which gives him a lot of armor piercing and armor piercing missile damage to his army. That's certainly decent enough when you're looking at it, and also a lot of melee attack. But then we look at his skill line. Like, Skarsnik has an ambush benefit, and it's not just one benefit. He has a bunch of benefits related to ambushes. Like, he gets melee attack during ambushes, he gets a higher ambush success chance, he gets he gets a bunch of benefits that do only really work when you're considering the ambushes, like armor piercing weapon damage during ambushes, leadership during ambushes, that kind of stuff. But it isn't, by ambushes without the stock stance for Legendary Lord is not really that great. Sure, you can still abuse ambushing against the enemy to do a significant amount of damage against them. One of the things Skarsnik is missing that would actually make him more useful, he gets the charge bonus, but what he's missing is the armor from the Goblin Tide. So if you look at the Goblin Great Shaman, just as an example, this one, the reason, like, I would argue that the Goblin Great Shaman is actually far better to lead their army because he gives 15 armor at rank 10 for all Goblin units. Not Night Goblins, but regular Goblins, including Nasty Skulkers. Yes, they will get 15 armor benefit. Well, it doesn't affect Night Goblins, which is obviously an issue. It does affect a substantial enough number of units that you do want to get the Goblin Tide. This is the difference between Skarsnik and Grom, and why Grom is the much better Goblin leader, because Grom does have the Goblin Tide skill. Skarsnik is built around ambushing, but he doesn't have the stock stand, so unlike a Leafanar or Old Skaven, he is not really going to be able to utilize those benefits. If he could utilize those benefits, that would be a bit of a different discussion. He does have some useful buffs and debuffs in combat, like with Fermented Fungi or Spirit of the Bad Moon. But then he has like a useless benefit of like underbosses. Now, stealing 25% experience earned by other lords is actually a net negative within the context of Warhammer 3, because you actually want your other armies to have more experience. So this is genuinely a negative to have. And then you get like, oh, you can recruit Goblin Big Bosses and Night Goblin Shamans in every province. One, you never want to recruit Night Goblin Shamans. Like, if you want them School of Magic, yes, go with the Goblin Great Shaman. With regards to the Goblin Big Bosses, it's like, okay, but that's not increasing hero capacity. If he could increase hero capacity for Goblin Big Bosses, might be worth it, but that stealing of 25% experience is really a major downside. Like, never get this skill if you can avoid it. You don't have to. It doesn't add anything. It will be a major downside because it will mean your other lords, except Skarsnik himself, will level up slowly. Like, your main lord is the one that's always going to level up fastest in a campaign, regardless of who you're playing as. So you actually want the opposite. You want your other lords to gain more experience as quickly as possible to have access to their skills. Skarsnik stealing that experience is genuinely a major downside. Like, it's to this point that, like, when you don't want to get something in a special skill line because it ends up being a net negative, a significantly net negative in your campaign, that is a really bad Legendary Lord. And yes, he is really not worth confederating, because, like, it is just better to get the Goblin Great Shaman, and while he doesn't have the melee abilities Skarsnik does have, they can still get an Rakarth Spider with Catchweb Spider Shrine. That's not something to sneeze at either. And while they lack the melee skill line that Skarsnik does have, they will provide some magical benefits, and crucially that Goblin Tide skill line. Like, if Skarsnik had the Goblin Tide skill line, and if he didn't have a skill that stole experience from other lords, he would be in a better position. Yes, you can skip the skill, but severe limitations in this campaign, and you can really tell that this was a campaign designed for a very different era that doesn't fit well within the context of Warhammer 3. You can make it work, don't get me wrong. Like, the point of this video is about legendary lords that can make it work, that are really powerful. He certainly is powerful, undeniably so. Like, you can wipe out Forgrim very, very quickly in this campaign and annihilate everyone that stands in your path in this entire area by just, like, building 6 stacks of goblins, nasty skulkers, and goblin archers. That does work, but then you can also do that with Grimlor, Azag, Warzag, Grom. And let's not even talk about how significantly far ahead Grom is compared to Skarsnik. The only limiting factor in Grom's campaign is the climate. But if you look at what Grimgor can achieve in a campaign, yes, it is a night and day difference. Like, I would strongly argue Skarsnik is the worst legendary lord of the Greenskins to play. He's got the least interesting campaign. He just doesn't have a campaign and campaign mechanics that fit within the context of Warhammer 3. And finally, and number 1 is Tretch Craventail of the Skaven. Honestly, I would say Tretch is probably one of the worst legendary lords in the game. However, he's still a Skaven legendary lord, and so because of that, he is still very, very strong. But make no mistake, Tretch is, well, Tretch. Let's go over this. So you get Scurry Away, has an improved effect and a minor ward save while active. That is a fantastic benefit. So when your units rout, when your units are about to rout, they get a bit of a damage resistance. Yeah, that's a really sweet benefit. Or when they have routed, they'll take less damage. Fantastic. Storm Vermin do give encourage for units. That is certainly a sweet benefit because Skaven do have issues with leadership. That is certainly not something to sneeze at. And they also gain additional armor, base weapon damage, and per unit experience for all clan rats and Storm Vermin. So really, it's the Storm Vermin benefits that Tretch does have. Then, for 3 turns after declaring war, you get an ambush success chance of plus 25%, Vanguard deployment, menace below, and enemy reinforcement range. Enemy reinforcement time is plus 50%. It's kind of hilarious to think that actually Tretch is a better Skarsnik than Skarsnik actually is. That's not even a joke. He actually is a better Skarsnik, but he's kind of worthless. Like, both of them are pretty worthless. Tretch has the benefit that he's a Skaven, so Skaven, those kind of benefits, like just having stock stance, is a net benefit in his campaign. But looking at his items, well, what item? He has one like a Lucky Skull Helm. Yay! That gives your allies in range of max 1 for 40 damage resistance, some physical resistance, and a success chance. That's nice. He's also focused on ambushing, but a lot of the benefits he has just don't work. Like, who wants to recruit Skaven slaves in a Skaven campaign? Like, if you want to go for massive units, it's like, get clan rats. And honestly, don't even get clan rats. You don't need to get clan rats if you're playing as the Skaven. There are many Skaven armies that do work quite well. Clan rats and Skaven slaves are one of those that you really don't want to go for. Like, go for the entire hidden lair chair. Go for the entire weapon dump chair. Go for the entire monster chain. Those will work significantly better than anything you can get from this chain. The only reason you bother with the clan pit is because you want to get a lot of chieftains in the campaign. So you certainly will be building a lot of clan barracks, but that's because you want the heroes, not the units. At all from any of that. Like, unless you literally have no choice, generally speaking, at the beginning of a campaign. But then you look at the other benefits, like, oh, another ambush benefit, missile resistance for clan rats and storm vermin, speed, campaign movement range after winning a battle. Like, the campaign movement range is certainly nice, especially because it can go up to 15%, but still. Then you get the ability, stay here, I'll get help, which buffs leadership when buffs leadership of units when Tretch is out of melee. So he's got a bunch of melee benefits, but that's not quite the way you want to play Skaven. Also, he has a bunch of Storm Vermin benefits, right? And he has Devastating Flanker for all units in his armies. Like, this is the thing. Like, Tretch is built around using Storm Vermin in a lot of ways, but even his other benefits, you want to use other things other than Storm Vermin. Get Rat Ogres, because Devastating Flanker on Rat Ogres might just be an insane benefit. Like, 46, double that, yeah, go to 93 charge bonus. That ends up being pretty substantial. Or Mutant Rat Ogres, or Brood Horrors, or Hell Pit Abominations if you so desire, or just, yeah, regular Rat Ogres. Or if you want to go down the infantry path, Warp Grinders can end up being quite a bit better with all the benefits that Tretch provides them. Or you can, just go with the regular and tried and tested Gutter Runner, Night Runner combination. That works quite well in a campaign. Storm Vermin are now worth recruiting. It's not because they're bad as units, though they're certainly not good enough as units to justify using them. But it's not the problem necessarily of quality, it's the problem of cost. Storm Vermin are expensive. They're expensive to recruit, they're expensive to maintain. So you never ever really want to get Storm Vermin in a campaign. You want to get a lot of different other units. And I guess that's the problem really in Tretch's campaign. He was designed around this sneaky ambush melee style around clan rats and storm vermin, but that is genuinely the worst playstyle you can embrace as the Skaven. As I said, there's the artillery option, there's the weapon team option, there's the gut runner, night runner option, there's the monster options. All of those are better, or the hero option. It's not that Tretch is horrible, in fact he can be quite powerful. I played an entire campaign as Stretch Craventail to tell you that. That was not a fun experience, I gotta tell you. Like, you just end up realizing that you will never achieve as much as any of the other legendary lords that the Skaven do have. And that is where really the issue is in this campaign and other campaigns on this list. It's not that any of these lords are per se bad. They're not. I stress this out. They're not bad lords. They can work brilliantly well in point of fact. It's rather the issue that while they can and do work in a lot of ways, the price you're paying to the way these campaigns end up playing out is not conducive for a great experience. I want to stress, like, some people have the argument that, oh, some of these campaigns can be challenging. I'm not sure I would consider any of them really challenging, with the exception of Belegar, and only there because you have a lot of foes surrounding you, but you can certainly take out Skavenblight very, very quickly in a campaign, like just Zerg Rush. When you get Zerg Rush Skavenblight, I'm not sure I could call that a challenging campaign. Truth be told, I think like I think like any campaign in the game right now is not challenging. It's just frustrating when you have limited resources. That's how I describe the situation. I don't think it's proper challenges because you have a crap lord like Daniel. Like, if you want the challenge, play Kuya for Daniel, I suppose. Like, I could accept that argument there. Or Nakari, honestly. Like, Nakari is probably the only genuinely challenging campaign, but for the right reasons, at least early on. Later on, it becomes a hassle, but early on, yeah, it can be a lot of fun playing a card campaign for a limited time period. But after that, it does lose its charm. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Christine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. And don't play Trish Craventel. He's dead and buried. He's not even a legendary lord. Like, fun fact, he genuinely is not a legendary lord. He's a chieftain. He's a hero masquerading as a legendary lord. He doesn't really fit what they're doing here with Clan Rectus. I understand he's one of the named Skaven characters, but yeah, he is pretty pathetic. And we remember that just because Creative Assembly used to release free legendary lords, that they weren't necessarily good. I mean, Dryka, Balifanar, Emmerich, yeah, different situation. They are fun. Tretch, not as much.